When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 58, Trauma Accumulated, Misperception of Illness, and Finding His Way to Be Impactful. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our courageous and daring guest, Michael Skinner. Michael is an award-winning advocate, educator, writer, and critically acclaimed musical artist who addresses the issues of trauma, abuse, and mental health concerns through his work in public speaking, writing, and his music. He is the founder of The Surviving Spirit, a monthly newsletter, and a website sharing resources on trauma, abuse, and mental health. Michael has appeared in various media, including being a keynote speaker for the National Press Club, United Nations, and the State Department, as well as delivering presentations at schools, mental health centers, and correctional facilities. He was part of the groundbreaking episodes of Oprah Winfrey that addressed the issues of males sexually abused as children and has since appeared on many TV, radio, and internet shows and has had a few book chapter contributions. Michael has continued to help people by consulting and training the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, which has been crucial in helping to shape the policy initiatives and directives for the delivery and implementation of trauma-informed care and services. Well, hello, Michael. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Thank you, and greetings to you.
Amazing. Michael, I am really thrilled to have you on the show today. First of all, so many accomplishments and achievements. This is just fantastic. I'm really grateful for your willingness to come on the show today on this platform and tell your story. I'm really encouraged when I get guests who are really enthusiastic. It gives me opportunities to draw from their inspiration and their strength. And I feel supported when people share their stories here. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for the opportunity, because my whole thing is, if I can just reach one person and through this show or wherever I'm sharing, I'm grateful for that. And again, honored to be a part of this, because there's lots of people you can be interviewing today. Thank you.
Oh, you know what? It's lovely to have you on the show. And I am certain that you're going to be making an impact to more than just one individual. And it's really important that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma. That's the intention behind the podcast. And in case you're still wondering, I know you are familiar with the podcast. This podcast, it's really about bringing forward those untold stories that people go through, whether it's directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And one thing that's a common theme, we know no matter what the story is, there is impact on a person's own mental health in some way that remains tucked away. If a person is experiencing any kind of loss or transition, any kind of stress, it is the mental health portion that they don't talk about, even if they're really good at public speaking or telling their story or sharing openly with people. And the other thing I find is that if a person's story has anything to do with mental health, there's multiple parts of their story that doesn't get told. So this platform is really a way to help break those barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So I'm really grateful that you're here chatting with us today. And my hopeful mission is for you and I to be able to stand tall and encourage people to share and tell, but people typically have reservations for expressing. And I continue to bring a trend forward. It's called the mental beauty rethink. Michael, what comes across your mind when you hear these words, the mental beauty rethink?
I think of, for me, having peace and joy in my life and hoping others find that somewhere in their healing journey.
Mm-hmm,
Peace,
mm-hmm.
joy. I was going to say serenity, but that's pretty much the same thing as peace. Having compassion from others and empathy for others.
Yeah. It really helps to neutralize. The phrase really helps to neutralize. For me, I think about it, I get different sort of ideas every time I hear the words myself. But I definitely feel the mental beauty rethink it provides an opportunity for more hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope is huge. That's the
Mm-hmm.
big thing, that even in the darkest of times, to see that little glimmer of light, there is always still hope. And if you don't have it from within, for myself, I would look to others to help
Mm-hmm.
ignite my own little candle of hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really meaningful perspective when we're able to take time and really reflect on what the words mean. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. So, Michael, shall we get started?
Sure.
Amazing. There is much to uncover in today's conversation, so here we go. All right, Michael, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
It's still the ever present, unrelenting pain of the stigma around the two words mental illness. That still has an impact upon me, and it's impacted me mentally, physically,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, and socially.
Mm-hmm. Can you say the title again?
The unrelenting pain of the stigma of mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Impacting you in so many ways in every aspect of your being. There's obviously more there in terms of where that title is coming from. Can you give us a teaser before we get into your untold story?
Well, it's not just in my head, it's the emotions, how I am as a person spiritually,
Mm-hmm.
socially. Those two words, mental illness, mentally ill, have a
Mm-hmm.
devastating way of disconnecting us from others. Trauma and abuse disconnect us from ourselves and society. And then when you add those two words, and I know it's the language of the land, society, mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
mentally ill, but for me now, it's become an abrasive language because I just heard it used in detrimental ways against me, that you're mentally ill, you'll never work again, you'll be this
Mm-hmm.
way your whole life. Maybe you can volunteer someday. So the simple act of trying to date again after a divorce, I wouldn't meet someone and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm mentally ill," but they'd visit my website and learn that I'm an advocate on the matters of trauma, abuse, and mental health. And because I deal with post-traumatic stress, and there was a time I dealt with major depression, all of a sudden my dating prospects with them were just gone. And
Mm-hmm.
so the message is loud and clear. The same with employment. As a
Mm-hmm.
musician, I've had gigs pass on me because they visit my website and they would see that I'm trying to break the stigma of it. So there's a price you pay when you speak to these things. So I can fully understand why some would not want to come forward, because it could have a negative effect or an impact in their workplace, amongst their
Right.
friends. So, the
Right.
stigma is real. It hurts. And gosh,
Mhm.
I wish we could just end it, but it's still there.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that's what our mission is, that we're going to work towards, continue working towards breaking those barriers, right, of mental stigma. And it definitely is going to take time, but I definitely think that a lot of amazing individuals such as yourself are making great impacts in the world today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, Michael, let's get right into your story. I'm really warmed up. I'm sitting at the edge of my seat here. I know you've got lots to share. So, yeah, give us a little summary of what your untold story is all about.
I'm an older gentleman now, and I've been reflecting a lot over the last year, looking at the next chapter of my life. And for some reason, this has resurfaced a lot, and it's hurt. And maybe I didn't fully grieve it. Maybe I didn't fully process it years ago. I thought I did.
Mm-hmm.
But it was my encounter with what I'll call the mental health system, the mental health center that I was, I'm using quotation marks,
Mm-hmm.
receiving treatment for several years. Now, please keep in mind, I had a life prior to the post traumatic stress, the flashbacks, the major depression, knocking me down, putting me down for the count for a while. I was married, I had 5 children, I was a homeowner, was a successful business owner. I had a good income. I don't care about money, but I just say
Mm-hmm.
that. So,
You were established and
yeah,
stable and you were living a life.
I had a life.
Yes.
My ex was a stay-at-home mom with 5 kids, so I had a decent income, but I loved what I was doing. I was in the music business, and I was still, gigging on the weekends as a drummer in a rock and roll band. And then the pains of the past, those little snippets, the flashbacks, they wouldn't stop. And long story short, I'll call it a nervous breakdown, a nervous breakthrough. I just had to deal with it. My body, everything fell apart. So I go to get help at the mental health center. And I'll keep in mind, it's not like people were mean, they're all with smiles. And I didn't have a clue as to what was going on.
So, when was this nervous breakdown or where you were getting help?
Right after January 1st, 1993. So
Okay.
that's when it
Okay.
happens.
Okay. So, you went to get help. You didn't know what to expect.
I could not understand this because I was just as guilty as others before, saying it's in the past, forget about it. I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
forget about it, but it came
Mm-hmm.
back to haunt me.
And when you say it came back to haunt you, you're talking about like prior traumas.
It was the traumas.
Right. Okay.
And the best way for folks to try to understand it, I had been aware of a good part of it, not all of it, because I think the mind, body, and spirit has a way of protecting us. But what would happen would be little snapshots, little images would creep into my consciousness, and I would do everything in my power to suppress them and just work. I was a workaholic. That was my way of helping keep it down. But eventually, those little images, those Polaroid snapshots, basically, it was like a long, winding movie that I had to watch. It was my childhood and teenage years, and a lot of the abuse that took place in Salima. It was devastating. It was
Mm-hmm.
soul crushing trauma. It did a
Mm-hmm.
number on me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I hope people get it. I'm sharing an analogy. I'm not saying I stuck a video in my head and watched.
Right.
When I saw my notes years later, when I looked at my records, the first psychiatrist that listened to me, basically saying what I'm sharing with you now, he wrote, he thinks he's a VCR player. He was able to put a movie in his head. And
Mm. He took it like for verbatim, like literal.
what was he missing with me as a human being? And again, my ex-wife was with me.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone grasped what I was saying was an analogy. I was trying to share. I couldn't put it. So that just started the process.
Mm-hmm.
I was put on antipsychotic drugs, all kinds of. There was a regimen of drugs. And again, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
anti-medication. I'm anti-over medication.
Well, yeah, you need to have medication for the root causes and for what you're actually experiencing and diagnosed with. But it doesn't sound like you were being assessed thoroughly.
No,
There are some pieces missing there.
and again, they said they were trauma informed, but this is not trauma practicing. And I wasn't even
Mm-hmm.
aware of that. But they were aware that I had trauma. And when I started seeing one counselor, she said, yeah, the majority of my clients are trauma survivors, and a lot of it's abuse survivors. So that was the population that they were dealing with. And then as I started my advocacy, I learned that over 90% of folks receiving services at mental health centers are in fact dealing with trauma and some level of abuse. And again, there was smiles. People could be friendly, but also if I started to question something, I had a few would say, well, now you're starting not to be compliant. And I had learned from others what that meant. That meant you could go to the state hospital. I was 39 and 40 years old at this point. I'm an adult. And now I have therapists talking to me like I would talk to my 5-year-old daughter when she woke up from a nightmare and I would have to comfort her. They're talking to me. They were patronizing. It was condescending. And I knew it. And Salima, that hurt. I already felt great shame and blame inside of me because of the sexual abuse and the physical abuse, the emotional abuse I experienced as a child and as a young teenager. This was just reinforcing all of that because my thought processes was skewed, and now I can look back. It was also skewed by the drugs I was on. I was not thinking clearly, so it just made me feel like crap. I just felt so low.
I definitely think that what you're sharing is an experience of feeling ostracized. You went somewhere to get help. You put your trust in the system, and no one seemed to be taking the time to really understand what you were expressing, what you were trying to articulate. No one was taking what you were saying with a grain of salt. It was all becoming like a literal documentation of, oh, he said this, he said that, and not looking at the bigger picture. And if you are taking medications that are not consistent with a diagnosis that you have, yes, there's a lot of side effects that you can have pharmacologically that we know. And so it must have been a really tough time to feel that amount of blame and shame and feeling like, did you feel isolated?
I did. I just felt alone. Then the isolation was greatly impacted. Again, we opened up talking about the stigma. Because now childhood friends, guys and females that I knew as friends for years, and from teenage years and from high school, and business associates, musicians that I knew, they wouldn't give me the time of day. And I wasn't expecting them to save my life, but a phone call, maybe show up and want to go get a cup of coffee, something just to acknowledge that, hey, Michael's still here, and we still honor you as a human being. But that didn't happen. That said, there were so many that did cut me off. That being ostracized, that hurt. I did have folks that just stepped right up to the plate, but I tell you, they were too few and far between.
Right. It sounds like sometimes when we go through these sorts of tough times, we can start to take an account of who's really there in the support circle, right? Like we get to see who sticks around. But despite all that, it sounds like you faced so many kinds of rejections during this period. Even a few minutes ago, you were mentioning how during this time, there were a lot of different things that you had experienced, especially when you're talking about the stigma, right? From business associates to dating, to music groups, to childhood friends. It seems like this was all related because of assumptions and stereotypes that people might have been making against you and just against their understanding or with their limited understanding of what mental illness is all about. That must have just amplified that feeling of loneliness and isolation for you. I can't imagine what that was like.
I felt lower than low. And one of the things is, as I mentioned before, is sexual abuse as a child. That does something to you. And I look at it as soul crushing trauma. I've always felt that a piece of me was cut out spiritually. So things happen. We find ways to heal, but that piece I don't think is ever fully healed. Again, as I've mentioned, I have found peace and joy in my life, but that hole is still there. Something was taken from me. And that's what, when I opened up, was recognizing that something was taken from me in that being mistreated, and it was mistreatment in the mental health system. Now, if it was just my story, okay, that's unique, that's horrible, that was an aberration, but it's not. I have many friends who are much younger than me who still have experienced those very same things, Salima. So, how far have we come if they're still doing the
Mhm.
same thing? And I think of when I was talking about the grieving, I was a workaholic, so there was a lot of times I was, go, 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 but I was still a
Mhm.
good dad and a good husband. But now I was disconnected by the depression and post traumatic stress matters issues. But the drugs made me a zombie. I can remember my oldest daughter sitting on the couch next and just shaking me and saying, "Dad, come back." And I knew what she was doing. Salima, I couldn't even verbalize to her something is wrong if medications are putting me in that type of a drug stupor. The other thing
Right.
that helped me to get on with my healing, and it took me a few years, was, as you mentioned, there are side effects. I was not a good candidate for these. I wish
Mhm.
they had helped, but they weren't. They were bringing
Right.
in the suicidal ideation. So I had a
Right.
couple suicide attempts. And I remember my ex saying to them, "This is not my husband. You need to get him off these drugs."
But Michael, this would have been because of the medications that you were on. That's what sort of prompted the suicidal ideation. It's not that you were experiencing that before being on these medications. Is that correct?
I wasn't. So even now, I go through the winter and the holidays. Those are hard times for me, Selena. They're still hard times. And a thought can come through my head, but I don't act upon it. I think a lot of folks can have those thoughts, but I didn't act upon it.
Like a passive, fleeting thought
Right.
is what you're saying. Like,
Exactly.
wow, life is really tough. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. Like that sort of thought.
That kind, right.
Not like I have this plan, this is what I'm going to do, and here's what equipment I have, or planning out the details. It's not like there was an active thought, it was a fleeting thought. Doesn't sound like these thoughts were lasting very long.
No, but when I was on those drugs, it
Hmm.
became an act.
Right. So it was really amplified. Okay.
That's my point to this. I'm
Right.
not on any drugs anymore.
Right.
I have not done anything.
Yeah, it sounds like you really lost a significant part of your life having gone through all of these negative consequences. I still can't grapple with what it's like to be told it's all in your head, to be put in that situation where you have to question yourself and wonder, what am I doing wrong? Or how come no one gets me? Or gosh, maybe this is what life is all about. You clearly did work through it. I'm just sitting here thinking about what that would have been like, and I still can't wrap my head around it. It also sounds like there were a lot of other traumas that you experienced growing up. In a private conversation, you mentioned other things that you experienced growing up. Are you able to speak to any of those pieces today?
I can speak to anything. I'll answer any question. So there was the sexual abuse I experienced, and that was at the hands of both of my parents and their pedophile friends. And
Mm,
years later, learning that I was trafficked. I didn't have that language back then, so they
mhm,
trafficked me. There was a lot of extreme physical abuse that was done to me. My lower back and my neck bear the brunt of that pain. It's with me every day. So when
mhm,
someone says just get over it, trust me, I
mm.
want to.
That's
That pain is
right.
as we're sitting here talking, my lower back and my neck, they hurt. A neurosurgeon wanted
Yeah.
to replace the discs in my. I'm not ready for that yet. I don't want to do that. That's the damage that was done. I've had a lot of head injuries as a child because of that abuse. It was also neglect. I've dealt with mild traumatic brain injuries and a lot of concussions.
Mhm,
So I can have a
mhm,
simple fall or a slip. And even now, I'm dealing with post concussive symptoms. So back when I
mhm.
was in the mental health center, I experienced some falls and accidents, which exacerbated the head injuries. And I didn't know that at the time, Salim.
Right. You couldn't make sense of it at the time. Now, are you an only child, or do you have siblings as well?
I'm the oldest of 5.
And so did your siblings also experience anything similar to what you experienced growing up?
We all lived in that same house. 2 of my brothers
Okay.
ended their life. They didn't end it because they couldn't pay their bills. It was what
Mm.
they experienced as children.
I'm so sorry to hear about that.
Thanks.
That must have been so devastating.
It was, and it still is, and that's another thing.
Mhm.
Speaking today is when I thought, well, what can I share? How can I help someone understand? Because there's that
Mhm.
phrase, just get over it or whatever. I
Mhm.
I sort of stuffed it down when I lost my brothers. And it was over a span of, maybe 10 to 15 years for each respective one. But
Mhm.
how the mind, body, and spirit works, I'm grieving their loss now. And it's been
Mhm.
with me. And I guess I'm just in a better space for it, or I'm just
Mhm.
open to it. So that hurts. A month ago was my brother David's birthday, May 15th, and I couldn't understand why I was having a hard time. Then it dawned on me, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
today is his birthday.
Right. You made those connections and you pieced it together. There's so much that you have been through, this cumulative effect of all these events and all of the things that you've described. Yes, it took place in an earlier time in your life, but these traumatic experiences really impact individuals, and it really has impacted you.
You had mentioned earlier the providers, the therapists, counselors, doctors saying to me, it's all in your head. So back then, I was raising some concerns with them about issues I was dealing with. And they were saying, that's exactly what they're saying. Well, you're mentally ill. It's all in your head. I finally got to get a visit with a neurologist. So him and his associate, they listen to me, they have all these questions, they do some testing, and they come back to me and say, Michael, you're dealing with mild traumatic brain injury. And I literally wanted to hug the 2 of them because they now validated what I had been saying, that something was going on with me that was outside of the realm of what the therapist wanted to call mental illness. I was dealing with some physical thing, and they were calling it mild traumatic brain injury. So you hear that statement, it's all in your head, far too many times. I'm not alone in these things, and how to break that stigma and just listen to people with compassion and empathy, and stop this judgmental mindset that happens because they put a label on you that you're mentally ill. And it's like all of a sudden you don't have a voice anymore. Where is the empowerment, voice, and choice in what you have to say about your life and what you do for treatment?
Hmm. Yes, you're right. It's unfortunate everything that you experience, and it is true that there are so many other people who've had such experiences. It's happened all too often, right? And because you've been able to do some of the work that you do, you've been able to make some shifts and contributions to the field. My question to you, I'm curious, Michael, when people come to see me for therapy, people are typically in one of 3 places. Sometimes people are right at the beginning, they're getting started and they're trying to navigate a path for healing. Some are in the middle, they're in the acute phases, they're in the thick of something, needing some support and guidance. And some people are looking back, trying to make sense of things or get closure, or looking to work on that last piece so that they can move forward and go to the next chapter in their life. What part of the journey would you say that you're in? Would you say that you are getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
I'm looking back because
Mm-hmm.
obviously I've shared some, hurtful things and experiences, but
Mm-hmm.
I have found ways, and again, learning from experts, reading everything I can on how to heal from trauma, abuse, and
Mm-hmm.
mental health,
Mm-hmm.
depression. So I feel I'm in the next chapter of my life, figuring out
Mm-hmm.
how to move forward. What am I going to do? Where can I still have some impact, but also do I slow down? Because I'm aware that there's a lot of other great advocates out there doing things, and just trying to see and find my way. What I'm going to do for this next part of my life. Again, I'm content with what I have. I'm grateful for what I have.
Mm-hmm.
I have a roof over my head. My bills are paid, and I have food. And I immerse myself in a lot of nature and gardening and music,
Mm-hmm.
but still, what is the next piece of that? And I'm still
Mm-hmm.
piecing that together.
You're piecing it together. Yeah.
I started writing a lot, and I'm sort of three-quarters way through a memoir, but I had to stop a bit because I had a couple falls, some accidents on my head. So
Mhm.
I'm dealing with
Oh, no.
post-concussive symptoms again.
Right.
So
Again. Well, you gotta take time for healing.
so
Mhm.
it's time to let that heal because it's hard for me to type and look at a screen and then the
Of
fatigue kicks
course.
in.
Absolutely. You need to take the brain rest for sure. Mhm. Well, you said you're 3/4 of way in, so, you take care of yourself in the process, and the rest will right itself. It'll happen one
Right,
step at a time.
right. Yeah.
Mhm. So what do you wanna remember? Like, what's been that healing signature for you on your journey? Because you say you're looking back and you're now into that next chapter. What has been that healing signature for you on your journey?
I really think it's been my interactions with fellow peers. Now, whether that was
Mm,
peers in attending adult children of alcoholics support group meetings, whether
mhm,
that was peers who became friends attending support groups for those abused as children, peers that I met in mental health support groups, and
mhm,
peers that I've interacted with just over the course of time that I've met in treatment facilities. I met at a hospital or a respite place,
mhm,
peers, and some stay in my life, others it's for a short time or whatever. But that connection to fellow human beings, because as I said at the outset, I find that trauma, abuse, and the concerns of mental health disconnect us from ourselves and others.
mhm,
Peer support helps us to reconnect to the outside world and to fellow human beings. And it has helped me to reconnect to myself. So I feel validated. I've created a family of folks that, even though we may have walked a little bit different path or different experiences, it's that
mhm,
validation, that empathy, that caring, and it sounds cliched, support, just accepting one another as a human being. Salima, that has made
yeah,
a huge
yeah,
difference. Don't get me wrong. Everything I've learned about trauma and healing and all the different things in
mhm,
depression, all those
mhm.
articles, all those books are great, but it's
Well, that helped you give you information and context and help you make sense of things. But I think what you're talking about is that common humanity. As humans, we are wired for connection. And so when you're not isolated and feeling alone and you're actually connected with people and you're feeling accepted, you can be your authentic self and not judge yourself and not shame yourself. And if you're not doing that to yourself, you can recognize it more and more if other people are putting you in that position. So when you're feeling validated and you're feeling safe and secure around people, you're building healthy connections.
yeah, because I've been a public figure speaking out
Right.
on terms of sexual abuse, mental illness, and all that stuff, and trauma and abuse and healing. And these folks still accepted me. They still cared for me.
Mhm.
And some would
Right.
actually say to me, Salima, I love you, Mike. I love you, Michael. And they hug me. It's like, wow.
Right. All those rejections that you faced and those secrets that you had to sort of keep in your life to keep going. And it's like the message finally fit
Yeah.
because I can see that you tried to let your guard down and show yourself compassion by letting people know this is what I'm going through. This is what I need to do. I'm an open book. Here's where I'm at. And you were getting shut down from different places and different people. And here you're getting your needs met. You're finding connection and joy. And that must have been a really good, feel good moment that continued to grow for you.
I can't give it enough thanks. I used to
Mhm,
close all my presentations and performances with the song Stand By Me.
mhm,
Now I have my
mhm,
own song that I close out with, and it's called Joy. And I wrote that specifically to give thanks to those who have stood by me. I have another song that's addressing peer support and friendship, and that's called By My Side. And so
mhm,
I've been able to articulate that through my music, and I use those if I'm doing a workshop or, as I said, a performance presentation in this arena. And I
mhm.
that's my way of giving thanks.
Michael, we've talked about so many different elements of your story and so many different layers of the trauma accumulated and the stigma, and really working through the alienation of what you've experienced. I want to know, I mean, we have been talking about your mental health front and center, but I'm curious if you can tell us a bit more about your mental health was affected. If you are able, can you say maybe a little bit more about, like, did it take a toll on your physical health? What sort of internal competing thoughts did you have? What other emotions were coming up for you? Can we take a couple moments to sort of go down that, to zone in on that a little bit
Yes,
more?
and I'm going to say a word, dissociation.
Yes.
Okay, so that has been with me my whole life. Obviously, well, maybe not so obviously, but as a child and a teenager and a young man, I had no clue what was going on or why this was happening. Those out of body experiences, that shutting down, that zoning out, and just losing complete track of time, being able to numb out to any type of stressor, any type of impending doom.
Mm-hmm.
Learning later, because I started seeing a psychologist, she raised it with me because she had me take the tests and everything. And by this point, I had learned about dissociation. So I had an understanding about it.
Well, for the listeners, let's let them know what disassociation is, right? So we know that it's a mental process of actually disconnecting from a person's thoughts and feelings and memories, or even your sense of identity, right? So
Yeah.
it really does affect your perception of time and your identity. And sometimes the symptoms go away on their own, but sometimes the impacts can be so intense. Some people have described it to me in the past like it feels like they're looking at themselves from the outside, like that outer body experience where you feel as though you're watching yourself in a film, or looking at yourself from the outside, like you're observing your own emotions, feeling disconnected from parts of your body or your emotions, that sort of thing. That's the stuff that people have shared with me. Is that what was the experience for you?
That is a huge component. The other one, not so much now, but again, that's only been the last few years that is dissipated. Looking at my hands or looking in the mirror, Salima, and who is that? That is very disconcerting.
The identity. Yeah.
Looking at my hands and like, I did not understand the same thing looking in the mirror. Who is that? So that that I'm going to say that was crippling to me in many ways for
Mm-hmm.
many years because it got in the way of my functioning, but it didn't take much
Mm-hmm.
for me to go into that flight, if you will, through dissociation to protect
Mm-hmm.
myself. It was a
Mm-hmm.
great
Mm-hmm.
coping skill as a child and a teenager, but it became a pain in the butt as an adult because I didn't need
Mm-hmm.
that, but it had been wired into my system, the whole development of my brain and nervous system. I was just on automatic default. So that has taken a long time to come to grips with that and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to sound cliched, but the mindfulness of just accepting that it's here because stuff still comes up that'll cause me to dissociate, but I'm aware of it now and I
Right.
just sit with it. I don't fight it. Before I used to try to fight
Yeah.
it and get rid of it,
Right.
it made it
Yeah.
worse. Now, if it comes in, if I'm in the presence of mind to say, okay, you're visiting with me for a bit, we'll have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, then I'd like you to
Right.
leave.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't last for long periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
Something may trigger me from the past and cause me to dissociate for an hour or two. It may be a better part of a day, maybe into the next day, but then it's gone. So that's the good
Mm-hmm.
news. So if folks are out there struggling with this, it just takes time, and all our timetables are different. It's taken me many years to get to this point
Mm-hmm.
to accept it. It's part of my life.
Yeah. But it seems like because now you're sitting with it, you feel it when, this visitor comes,
Yeah.
right? You're sitting with openness and curiosity. So even though it takes time to process these things, I heard you say that it takes less time than when perhaps you'd be resisting it and fighting it, right? And maybe less energy too, or it's still energy consuming, but it's more effective. There's some benefit in working through the feelings.
There is. I
Mhm.
can't fight it. And it didn't take long for me to figure out, because when I would be doing presentations, I'd be doing a keynote or doing a workshop, and they'd want me to talk about my healing journey. So I would take out my chapstick, and there's a rough part of it. So I would use that to just, scrape against myself to keep me present. The other thing is I drink a lot of water, and touching something physical,
Yeah. Help to ground you. Yeah.
bring myself back. I've been on sessions where I've been in a panel with other survivors or whatever it is, mental health thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just reach under and just be pinching my inner thigh just to help bring me back, to ground me. I don't need to do that as much anymore. My
Mm-hmm.
chapstick is out now, but I haven't had to pick it up in my chat with you.
Right. That's great. That's good news.
There is healing.
Mm-hmm. Progress. There's progress.
It's looking at what we're dealing with. I hate to say embrace it, just accept, the acceptance. Okay, this is what I'm dealing with.
Well, it's kind of like you're working with it again, as opposed to against it.
So for me, it's been the acceptance that it's part of who I am. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. I'm not afraid of it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
I wish, Salima, and again, this is part of the reasons that I'll be on conversations like this, and I'm grateful for you and other folks that have these types of podcasts. I just want to create awareness. I wish I knew this as a 20-year-old man. It would have saved me a lot of grief in my life.
Right. But you know things now.
Right.
So, Michael, tell us, what is your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you want them to know?
There's a wealth of resources out there to look at, to listen to. I mean, YouTube, podcasts, books. I mean, it's endless. Articles. And if your concentration, you can only read for a little bit, go on Psych Central or Psychology Today. Look at, they have articles, you can read them within 2 to 5
Mm-hmm.
minutes, maybe something longer. It's written from folks like yourself, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists. It's also written from survivors. So find peer support groups, find the ones that are online, and find the ones that are helpful, because there are some folks who can be hurtful because their healing journey, they're still hurting others. But there's a lot of great support groups out there. Find your path and try different things, because I've tried so many different things. I mentioned adult children of alcoholics earlier. I went to several different groups before I find a couple that I felt comfortable with. So that's the thing, is don't give up on finding that.
Yeah, so keep trying. So it's like, find your path, keep trying different things. You might have to give it a couple of tries.
Right. And I think of my friends, my peers, because there's other things that they have done that help them. So, yeah, you borrow ideas from each one of us, and also from the professionals that are trauma informed and trauma practicing and all, because you don't have to have childhood sexual abuse or childhood physical abuse. And most people have dealt with trauma. Learn how the trauma has impacted you, how it's impacted the mind, body, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
That will go a long way in helping to heal your mental health, your spiritual health, your physical health.
Healing happens on all levels. And when you start the process,
Right,
you can really tap into each one of those aspects, mental and spiritual and social, everything. It's so important to allow that healing to occur on all levels. But it starts by taking that first step.
right.
Right? Mm-hmm. So, Michael, I'm curious about if you could share, what was that game changer inspiration that would be close to you that reflects your untold story? Would there have been something that you came across that really sparked your healing? Like, is there a quote or a book or something that was really pivotal that helped to start your healing journey, or that was part of your healing journey?
I'm going to feel remiss by not mentioning other people, because there's others that have been out there doing it also for a long time. I'll just say Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma and healing, learning how the trauma impacted my life. It helped me to understand, no, I'm not crazy. No, I'm not weak. No, I'm not defective. Trauma had a major impact and influence upon every facet of my being. And now there are ways to heal from that I could heal
Right.
from this, through this, because I still feel the things I've experienced, it's going to be with me for a lifetime, but it's not crippling anymore. It can come in and set me back for a day or two, but it's not going to send me to the hospital or things like that.
Mm-hmm. So important when you say, like, it helped you to understand that I'm not defective. I'm not crazy. I'm not the one that's in the wrong.
Yeah.
Right? These are things that happened to you. You're not a criminal. You didn't do this to anyone, or you didn't try to do this with intentions of creating harm on anyone. You were just in a situation of accumulated trauma, and it was affecting you because you didn't even know how to handle it. So I can't imagine what those moments were like when you came across that reading material and you had that aha light bulb moment of, oh, this is what's going on with me.
There was a support group I used to go to in Boston, and then it branched out into different groups around the Boston area. And it was all us survivors of childhood abuse, childhood sex. Everyone was bringing forth all these little snippets that we were all learning, and it was like, wow. So we're not crazy. There's nothing wrong. These things were done to us. These are things that we experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. What is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey, Michael, that you would like to give a shout out to?
Being part of the Bristlecone Project, which is part of 1 in 6, which is all, for male survivors, that has been huge for me.
Wow.
I have a brotherhood, if you will. And then the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, because I'm on the listserv, and there's just a lot of great folks sharing articles, resources. And again, I don't always have to agree with everything I see, but great people out there doing good things. So, so the Bristlecone Project, National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, those have been helpful.
Okay, those are great shout outs. Awesome. Now, how can people connect with you if they would like to? How are you findable?
My website, mskinnermusic.com, that's one of the easiest because you can write to me from there. The Surviving Spirit website, because I send out the newsletter. Again, you can contact me from there. And also look up my YouTube channel because I post a lot of content. I have conversations, I share songs.
And you're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, correct?
Yeah, they can find me on Facebook and LinkedIn, correct.
Well, we're going to have a show notes page for you. So we're going to make sure we include all of that on there so that we have many ways for people to get a hold of you.
I'm out there.
That's perfect. Well, yeah, you do really great work. Your work is
Thanks.
very well known. So, Michael, guess what?
What's that?
You've just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thanks.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Michael, I really want to acknowledge and express my gratitude for the vulnerability and openness you have been able to do so today, and just so willingly share all of the different facets of your untold story on this episode. Having faced a great deal of complex trauma over the course of your life, especially starting right from childhood, and explicitly being able to share those pieces on the podcast today, and then working hard to make sense of it all, and all the work to transform your perspective on life and how to impact others to grow from their pain and turmoil is just so extraordinary to hear and to experience. So thank you for the deep conversation and for all the daring and sharing. It's been tremendous.
And thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And once again, Michael, thank you for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.